You know, I know how you feel about Chomsky. Some of you love him to death. Some of you think, well, he just talks and talks and talks. And a lot of you don't like his stance on 9/11. I know some of you want him to be forceful about the Israeli issue with 9/11. I do know that his stance on the Palestinian issue is sometimes it's frustrating to some of you. It's definitely frustrating to me sometimes. And but I can tell you one thing, that when we announced that we will have Dr. Chomsky on the program, we received a lot of emails from you. Apparently, he has a lot of followers all over the world, because we received a lot of emails from his fans. A couple of them from people who criticize him, but a lot from his fans. So the man does command a huge follower. And so I understand he's with us now? Okay. Dr. Chomsky, can you hear me? Very good. Thank you, sir, for coming on the program. It's an honor to have you on. Dr. Chomsky, I want to, there are so many things that I want to talk to you about, but at the same time, because there are so many different issues, we're not going to be going into deep into all these issues, so we have time to talk about and touch on a lot of these issues. And also, I'm expecting to have a heavy call-in tonight. I want to start with a subject you probably had hundreds of interviews, if not thousands, which is 9/11. Most of the people that I talk to or I interview on this program, I normally ask them the question of, what do you think about 9/11? What happened on 9/11? But I'm not going to ask you that question. I'm going to be direct and ask you, who did 9/11 and why?
Well, I think the best evidence we have is that it's pretty much the story that was reported.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me? I'll repeat. Can you hear me?
Did you hear the question?
Yes, I did. Can you hear me?
I can't hear you. It's very low. So,
all right, I'll try to speak louder.
Okay.
Is this better?
But much better. Much better.
Okay. I think the best evidence that we have is that the story that was reported is basically correct. Airlines, there were hijackers. Their identities are more or less known. They hit the World Trade Center. One of them hit the Pentagon. One of the planes was stopped and downed in Pennsylvania. And there's no real evidence to suggest that that's wrong.
So are you saying that you are with the notion that an airplane hit the Pentagon?
Yeah, I think the evidence supports that.
Okay. And you are also with the same notion that the Twin Towers were destroyed due to these two airplanes hitting them?
As far as we know, there's no evidence to the contrary. No credible evidence to the contrary. I mean, if there were evidence, there's an easy way to determine whether there is persuasive evidence to the contrary. There are thousands of highly qualified civil and mechanical engineers and graduate schools of engineering all over the country. Those who think there's physical evidence to the contrary can find plenty of people with appropriate credentials to consult with, and if they can be convinced, I'm sure they would have no problem in publishing papers in serious journals, putting forth the evidence before the scientific community. Well, to my knowledge, that hasn't happened, so it's impossible to proceed.
What about the... now, one thing, why do you think the government is not coming out and showing us the videotapes from the Pentagon? I mean, they put out one said this is the evidence, but you really couldn't see anything. So why aren't they coming and saying, okay, this is exactly what happened, so stop all these conspiracy theories? Why they're not doing that?
Well, I suspect that part of the reason is that they don't mind the conspiracy theories very much. In fact, they get quite tolerant treatment. And I can only speculate here, but I suspect that the reason may be that they regard this as helpful to them, since there's a huge amount of energy and effort being directed into efforts to determine what's called 9/11 truth initiatives and so on. And that huge amount of effort is diverted away, necessarily, from inquiry, protest, and action concerning much worse crimes of the administration, far worse, against Americans as well. So, from their point of view, it may not be a bad thing. Actually, I'm only speculating about their reasons. A way to determine their reasons would be to organize a congressional inquiry. There are congressmen who'd be interested to investigate what is being withheld and why. Incidentally, it's perfectly standard for the governments, any government, to try to withhold information from its own population. Anyone who's looked at the declassified record, as I have and others have, know that most of what appears there is an effort is not to protect national security, it's to protect the security of governments from their own populations, which they typically regard as a kind of an enemy. They don't want the population to know what they're doing. So withholding evidence is not unusual, but there are ways to proceed to bring it into the public. The easiest would be a congressional inquiry.
Now, in light of what you just said, and if you realize that Bush yesterday in an interview or a couple of days ago, which is nothing new, they've said this before, he said that that Saddam had the capacity, now the line is changing, that Saddam had the capacity to manufacture weapons of mass destruction. And then when he is asked, what does Iraq have to do with, because he mentioned that we lost 3,000 people in the Twin Towers, one of the questions was, what does Iraq have to do with that? And he said nothing. So,
correct.
You know.
Correct. It has absolutely nothing to do with it.
Okay, so is that part of the evidence that you're talking about? That if they show the evidence, then...
No, not at all.
Then there's another question about why we went and killed a couple of 100,000 Iraqis and 3,000 of us?
Yeah, we knew the reason for that. In fact, the Iraqis know the reason for that. The most recent poll in Iraq, just a couple of weeks ago, I think, by a U.S. investigating polling agency, found that I think it was 75% of Iraqis take for granted that the United States invaded Iraq to gain control of its oil. I think that was pretty obvious from the beginning.
Okay.
It certainly has nothing to do with 9/11, and we don't need any information from...
Okay. Now, we're going to get into the oil later on in the program, because I've read your opinion about the war. But let me switch gears a little bit now to Lebanon. Recently, right before the war, you visited Beirut, and you visited with Hassan Nassralla, the Secretary General of Hizbullah. And you said, I think Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, has a reasoned and persuasive argument that the arms should be in the hands of Hezbollah as a deterrent to potential aggression, and there are plenty of background reasons for that. Do you still think that Hezbollah should keep their weapons?
Well, I didn't say they should keep their weapons. I said they have a reasoned argument for it. And in fact, at the time that I said that, that happened to be the opinion of, according to polls in Beirut, of about 60% of the Lebanese population. By now, that has risen to about 87% of the Lebanese population, who accept now, as a result of what's happened, the Hezbollah argument that this is the only possible deterrent to an Israeli invasion. I mean, it would be very nice to find another. I mean, there are two questions here. One is whether Lebanon has a right to have a deterrent against an Israeli invasion, and to be precise, we ought to say a U.S.-Israeli invasion. 90% of Lebanese regard the invasion that way, and they're correct, so let's be accurate. So the first question is, does Lebanon have a right to a deterrent against a U.S.-Israeli invasion? And remember that this invasion in July is the fifth one in the past 30 years, none of them with credible pretext. So the first question is, do they or does anyone have a right to deter a U.S. or U.S.-Israeli invasion? Well, of course, in elite circles in the United States and Israel, they'll say no, nobody has a right to deter our efforts. But if we don't accept that, and of course the traditional victims don't accept it, then comes the next question. What should the deterrent be? Well, I did visit Nassralla, but I also visited many others, including his strongest opponents. I spent more time with them, and many others. And I was interested, so I asked them what their opinion is, and nobody has an answer. In fact, there was a national dialogue shortly after I left, before the invasion, which was concerned with this issue, and it reached no outcome. The Prime Minister of Lebanon, who's a Sunni, not a Shiite, and is strongly opposed to Hezbollah, nevertheless expresses the position of his government, his own position in his government is before the invasion, that Hezbollah is not a militia, but a resistance organization, and therefore is not subject to UN Resolution 1559 or the new Resolution 1701. Well, that's their opinion. It's their country. They have a right to decide whether they need a deterrent to U.S.-Israeli invasion and what that deterrent ought to be.
Okay. I'll tell you what, we have some people waiting to talk to you, so let me go to the phones and we'll come back and discuss other subjects. Tony on one. Go ahead, Tony.
Yes, Dr. Chomsky. Can you hear me?
Yes, he can. Go ahead.
Dr. Chomsky, I've read many of your books, and they're absolutely fascinating, but I have a general question, and I'd like you to address it. I read a 2004 paper that Robert Bork had delivered to an international body on human rights. And what disturbed me in the paper was the suggestion by Bork that individuals did not have universal fundamental rights. And he questioned whether or not this particular viewpoint was not the source of most of the troubles in the world. The question is this. It seems to me that by using this concept of terrorism, that most of the governments of the world are on a course of international authoritarianism that has as its objective to minimize and for all practical purposes, do away with dissent with every government. As a consequence of which only rights that individuals will have will be government rights.
Okay, ask the question, Tony.
Could you repeat?
Well, that's the question.
Okay, very good. A doctor?
I'm sorry, I just couldn't hear. I think the connection is not great.
No, go ahead. We can hear you.
Yeah, but I couldn't hear the question. Only a few words. Could you repeat it to me?
He's off.
No, but could you tell me roughly what it was?
Tell you the truth, I was hoping that he will ask the question, but he was talking about, I don't know, Tony, call back. Okay, I'll tell you what, let's move to something else. Now, do you think methods like unions or joining together under the system is useless today? And what I'm talking about is like government joining together under the one system. You know, perhaps the only option left is to create your own independent and self-reliant system, like what Hezbollah has done. And to fight for their system, and they succeeded where others have failed. Do you think that people should be looking for what is going to work for them? Do you think we will see this more and more in the world? Things like Hizbullah, we will see that people will take matters in their own hands instead of being on with the same system?
Well, I think we should... there's a reason why organizations like Hezbollah and Hamas and others have developed, and it's well understood. So one of the leading, most respected journalists in the Middle East, Rami Khouri, is the editor of the Lebanon Daily Star, before the invasion, pointed out that the Arab states have failed. They are failed states. They have been unable to protect their own populations, to deter U.S.-Israeli invasion, to prevent the U.S. and Israel from taking over Palestinian lands and territories and moving towards driving Palestinians to oblivion. They've been unable to protect their own people's rights, to provide them with services and so on. And he said in that kind of situation, people are not going to just say, well, okay, I'll decide to die. What they're going to do is form their own organizations. So you get structures within the state that provide services for people, that provide them with some protection, that provide some degree of deterrent against attack. And that's essentially what Hezbollah is. I mean, it developed as a result of the U.S.-backed Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982, which killed maybe 15,000 to 20,000 people and destroyed much of the country. In response to that, a resistance developed. Hezbollah took over after finally the leadership of it, and it did succeed after many years in driving Israel out of Lebanon. Now, that's after 22 years of Israeli violation of Security Council orders to withdraw, which they could do because they were backed by the United States. Hezbollah won a lot of prestige for leading that resistance. It's now along with Amal, which is very closely related to it, the similar programs. The two of them are essentially the parliamentary representation of the Shia sect group in the Lebanese confessional system. It's the largest of the minorities, and Hezbollah and Amal represent it. They have similar programs. Furthermore, Hezbollah was very successful in providing services, health, education, other services to the generally poor and neglected population, mostly the South, a few other places, which the government wasn't doing. And they won a lot of support for that. Pretty much the same has been true in the case of Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and elsewhere. I mean, there's a background to this. I mean, the U.S. and Israel have, and the West in general, strongly opposed secular Arab nationalist forces and helped destroy them. And they were partly destroyed by their own corruption and so on. But they were under severe attack from the West. The United States has strongly opposed secular nationalism. And the U.S. traditionally favored radical Islamism. I mean, the most extreme radical Islamist state in the world is Saudi Arabia. By comparison, Iran looks like a democratic heaven. And that's the oldest and most valued ally of the United States. The U.S.-Israeli alliance was really firmed up in 1967 when Israel performed a huge service to the U.S. government, to the Saudi Arabian tyranny, to the energy corporations, by destroying the main force of secular Arab nationalism, namely Nasser. And it continues like this. Well, okay, what has happened is that radical Islamism has filled the gap that has been opened by the destruction of secular movements which were unable to serve the circumstances, you are going to find just what Rami Khoury described. Organizations developing within the country that will provide the services that the government is not providing.
Okay. Doctor, stay with me. We're going to take a quick break and we will be right back.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. We are speaking with Dr. Noam Chomsky. Just one note to our viewers on the internet. Unfortunately, I am told that our internet has been attacked. So a lot of you may not be able to see us. We are trying to work on it, but I'm told that it has been attacked. But we will have the show. Now, those of you who are watching us on cable, if you know anyone watching us on the internet, just tell them the show is still going. We will have a rerun on our, it's going to be on our website later on, and also will be on Google's videos. So you will see this interview. Again, I apologize you're not able to see it on the internet now, but I'm told that we are, our site has been attacked, or our streaming has been attacked for some reason. I don't know. You're too dangerous, Doctor.
Well, not that dangerous.
Dr. Chomsky, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Now, I read a lot of your articles, I mean, way back when I was in college. And I was very impressed with the way you critically criticized Israel, and the way you talked and wrote about the Palestinians and their plight. And I know for a fact that you have built up a lot of credit behind your name, that you have millions, if not hundreds of millions of followers. And my question to you is, why don't you, because of what you write, why don't you take steps on the ground to help the Palestinians, such as maybe calling for a boycott of Israel, or sanctions against Israel, or divestments from Israeli corporations, something substantial on the ground? And I know a lot of people are following you and they follow what you say and write, but why aren't you calling for substantial actions to actually force the Israelis to give the Palestinians a break?
Well, I am calling for years, have been calling for substantial actions that that are the most effective and important in my view, much more important than that. And those are actions right here within the United States to change the policies of the U.S. government. It's because of U.S. government policies that these things are happening. And we're responsible for what the U.S. government does. We don't live in a dictatorship. There are plenty of things wrong with the government, but it's a free country. It's open. We have the options, if we have the will, to change U.S. government policies so that it will permit a resolution of the Israel-Arab conflict, Israel-Palestine conflict. And the form of that resolution has been pretty clear for 30 years at least. There's a very broad international consensus that the major step towards resolving the problem is to establish a two-state settlement on the international border, it's the pre-June 1967 border, with minor and mutual adjustments to straighten out the ceasefire lines and that sort of thing. That reached the international agenda in 1976 in a resolution at the Security Council proposed by the Arab states and supported by the Palestinians and most of the world. But the U.S. vetoed it. And I won't run through the rest of the record, but that's pretty much the way it's been since then. In fact, right at this moment, the U.S.-Israeli alliance is dedicating considerable efforts to undermine the option permanently by carrying out programs of annexation, dismemberment, imprisonment, in fact, of little cantons in the West Bank and Gaza. That's our policy, our responsibility. I want to talk about sanctions and boycotts. They should be against the United States. We're the ones who are responsible for it. And that's, I think, the substantive proposal that should be made. We can't cast the blame on someone else. If Israel will certainly do this, as long as the U.S. finances it, provides the arms, supports it, gives it diplomatic support, economic support, and so on.
Okay. Now,
those are choices that can be made right here.
Okay, let me just stop you for a second. And I know you said we need to work on changing the system here in the United States, but that is not going to happen, not in my life, not in probably for another 100 years. And I know your stance on the Israel lobby by Mearsheimer and Watt. And also, I know what you have said about Israel serves a strategic asset for the United States, and that the Israeli lobby, primarily AIPAC, is little more than a pressure group like any other trying to affect United States policy. I never seen a lobby that controls so much in any country like the Israel lobby, and you called it nothing more, little more than a pressure group. Now, you know anything about Israel, will be 98 senators voting for it, and 420 some representatives. So changing the system from the inside, that is going to be hell to do if it's not impossible. And so what other ways can we go besides changing the system from the inside? And what do you say about, I mean, when you play down the effect of AIPAC in the politics of the United States and call it just a little more than a pressure group?
Well, first of all, I didn't say that. I said it is the most effective of the lobbies, but the lobby is not AIPAC. The people who focus on AIPAC are ignoring the lobby. And I've repeatedly emphasized that. There is a lobby. The main lobby is the educated, the intellectual classes in the United States, the educated, articulate sectors in the United States, the people who write, who publish in the media, who publish in journals, who write opinions, who do most of the scholarship, who staff the think tanks and so on. Yeah, that's a really important lobby, far more important than AIPAC. And they happen to support U.S. policies towards Israel and the Palestinians. And if we look back at, I mean, AIPAC's a part of it, but it's a relatively small part. And that's important, but we can change that. We don't have to wait 100 years. You don't have to wait 100 years. You don't have to reform the U.S. system in a dramatic way to have public opinion influence policy. These are small changes. I mean, that's happened in the past. It happens in other countries. We can achieve it here. If we look back at the way in which this massive lobby was formed, influential lobby was formed, it goes back to what I was saying before. It didn't exist much. It was very minor before 1967. It became extremely important, significant after 1967. In fact, dominant in articulate sectors. Well, what happened in 1967? Just what I described. In 1967, Israel performed a huge service for U.S. strategic and economic interests, economic centers and strategic interests, for the energy corporations, for the military industry, for high-tech industry, for the tyrants who rule the oil producers, and that was a great service. They destroyed secular Arab nationalism, which was their main enemy, and in fact, at that point, the U.S. support for Israel solidified, and the articulate lobby took shape, and that's continued. So, a couple of years later, in 1970, Jordan was actually slaughtering Palestinians, Black September 1970, and it briefly as though Syria might intervene to protect Palestinians from being slaughtered. Well, the U.S. didn't want that, and what they were afraid that Syrian intervention might be a threat to the oil producers, who were very close allies of the United States, of course. Well, the United States at that point was in no position to make any military or other move to deter Syria. It was bogged down in Indochina. But Israel did it for us. They mobilized their air forces. They have a powerful military, thanks to U.S. support. And they mobilized their forces, and they threatened Syria. Syria backed off. The slaughter went on. That was very much welcomed by U.S. power. In fact, U.S. aid to Israel quadrupled that year. And if you look back at that time, you find that the opinions of U.S. intelligence, of analysts and others, were exactly that Israel can serve as a strategic ally of the United States, to strategic asset, to help the major U.S. programs, which are concerned with controlling the energy system. In fact, the Nixon administration at that time described Israel as one of what they called the local cops on the beat. There were several states that
Dr.
were
Chomsky,
regional cops.
Doctor, if you don't mind, just for sake of time, and we have a lot of people waiting.
That's the lobby. But that can be changed. You don't have to reform the whole country.
Okay.
Just convince people that carry out the efforts that will organize people to change policy.
Okay, let me ask you a question very quick, and then we'll go to the phones. Do you think the scenario, what we've seen, what Hezbollah has done to Israel, do you think do you think this is real, what we are watching here, that Hezbollah actually was able to, everybody's talking about defeated Israel, even inside Israel itself, or do you think they are basically just pumping up Hezbollah to show the world that Hezbollah is this big power, so we can go in later on with a massive force, and people are going to think, well, Hezbollah is so big, so we need a bigger force to take them out. Do you think this was orchestrated?
No, I don't. I think it was quite real.
Okay.
The overwhelming opinion in Lebanon is probably over 90% now. Hezbollah actually, for the first time, an Arab force, namely Hezbollah, held back in defeat, but held back an invasion by a very powerful army. The Israeli army is a very powerful army.
Very good. We're going to go to the phones. Let's go with line one. Go ahead.
Very upset by this.
Okay. Tony, go ahead.
Here's my question.
Very quick.
Do you think that we're in the midst of the rise of international authoritarianism that will, through international cooperation, put down dissent worldwide?
Okay. Very good. Doctor, did you hear the question?
Sorry, but the phone calls are not, I'm not hearing the phone calls.
Okay.
Can you repeat what was
yes, his question was... all right, what did we do here now? Okay, his question was, do you think we are in the middle of globalization, the New World Order, a national authority here? Is that what we are in the middle of?
Well, I mean, you can call it globalization if you want, but it's just another phase of old-fashioned imperial policy. I mean, of course, it always changes with different circumstances, but the United States is a world-dominant power. It's supported by Britain, which is now its junior partner. Other European countries more or less go along. So take, say, Germany, for example. Germany, which is a powerful state, has just provided Israel with a new class of submarines which can carry nuclear warheads. Well, the point of that is to provide a second strike capacity, meaning if the U.S. and Israel decide to attack Iran, and Iran tries to retaliate by striking at Israel, can't strike at the United States, then Israel now has a nuclear option to destroy Iran. So that prevents any Iranian deterrent to U.S.-Israeli attack. Well, that's Germany. In fact, Western powers are following their traditional program of trying to ensure that they control the resources and the markets and the populations of most of the world.
Okay, so you really think that the war in Iraq was just for oil, that Israel has nothing to do with it?
I don't say it has nothing to do with it, but I do agree with Iraqis that the major goal of the war was to ensure control over the oil system. In fact, the invasion of Iraq is probably harmful to Israeli interests. Iraq was not a threat to Israel.
So what Richard Pearl, 1996, wrote, the clean break, the strategy for securing the realm, that's not the implementation of that policy that we're seeing here?
There's a good reason why Richard Pearl has been out of the government for years. He's regarded as a crackpot. They didn't follow that policy. He also suggested in that same paper that they should extend a Hashemite kingdom, the Jordanian kingdom, should be extended to Iraq.
To Iraq, yeah.
Nobody paid the slightest attention. It's crazy.
Okay. Tell you what, let's go back to the phones with James from California. Go ahead, James.
Hello. Thank you, Hesham. Good evening to you. Good evening to you, Dr. Chomsky. I had a quick question and comment for Dr. Chomsky. Dr. Chomsky, I've met you a couple of years ago when you'd done a presentation in Los Angeles. And I came up to you, and you don't ever mention this fact, but I'd mentioned the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs to you in Ginza, and you know exactly what it was because you and I talked briefly, and you'd mentioned Jim Woolsey, who's part of it. And moments ago, you just mentioned that AIPAC wasn't a major part of the quote-unquote Israeli lobby, pro-Israel lobby in America. Well, I'd like to bring to your attention, sir, the name Morris Amatei. Morris Amatei is not only a founder of AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, but also founded Ginza. And we know that the tentacles of the pro-Israel lobby go from AIPAC to Ginza. We know what's behind this war in Iraq in accordance with the clean break agenda. And another aspect I'd like to address with you, because you're basically just the leftist side of the Zionist lobby. You said a lot of good things about what Israel does to the Palestinians to brutally oppress them, but basically many people in the know, like Jeff Blankford, an anti-Zionist Jew who's written about you as well, you're just basically the left side of the Zionist lobby. You try to focus on the energy companies as the reason for going into Iraq, and moments ago you made a comment saying that Israel did a tremendous service for us in the 1967 Six-Day War. I'd like to argue against that, sir. I'll bring up another name.
Okay, James, go ahead and...
no, quickly, this is very important.
Yes.
A gentleman by the name of Hassan, who was a mentor to bin Laden. He was displaced off his land when he was living in Jenin.
No. James, hold on. Did you hear what he said, Doctor?
Yeah, I just want to finish quickly.
I can hear his voice, but I can't hear what he's saying.
Well, I think he's having a problem hearing you, James, so I'm going to have...
Can I stand by, because this is very important. I'd like to also debate against what he said about how Israel...
Okay, well, hold on. Let me tell him what you said. Okay, let me tell you let me tell the doctor what you said. What James said is that he had met you before, and he apparently discussed some of this about AIPAC. That you said that it was not a major part of the Israel lobby, and also he said that he had mentioned Morris Amatei, who had started Ginza, and he said that you are the left side of the Zionist lobby. How would you answer that?
I would say that it's perfect nonsense. I'm giving my opinions. If you think they're wrong, tell me why they're wrong. Maybe they are. I'm perfectly open-minded, glad to hear criticism. I'm expressing my interpretation of the facts the best I understand them. My understanding is pretty much what I described. Sure, AIPAC is significant, but it's part of, there's a much stronger lobby. and that's the essentially the articulate intellectual community, which since 1967 has strongly supported Israeli expansion and aggression, just as it almost always supports U.S. government policy. And that happens to be U.S. government policy.
Okay. James, very quick.
Okay, sure. The second point I'd like to bring up is Dr. Chomsky continually trying to basically downplay the accuracy of the Mearsheimer-Walt paper on the power and influence of the pro-Israel lobby. He tries to say that Israel did such a service for us in the 1967 Six-Day War. I beg to differ with that.
He said, did a service for us as far as what?
Well, he says that it got rid of secular Arabism. Well, what it did is it basically got hatred against the West, particularly America, by displacing all the Palestinians off their land in the West Bank, including the mentor of bin Laden, Hassan, who was displaced out of Jenin, and it's cost us billions and billions of dollars in the terror problem we've had leading up to 9/11 and the World Trade Center attack in 1993. You can read James Bamford's Extra War book.
Okay.
So he couldn't be more wrong.
Okay.
Well,
very good.
See, I did hear that. The caller is just confused, is making a logical error. He's confusing two different things. One is the question, what is U.S. government policy? Second is the question, is that policy to the benefit of the people of the United States? Now, I happen to think that U.S. government policy is quite often not to the benefit of the people of the United States and not intended to be to their benefit. And the same is true of other governments. But that's a separate question from what the policy is. And what the policy is, I think we see quite clearly. The U.S. government strongly was very pleased with Israel's success in destroying their main enemy, secular Arab nationalism, which was regarded as a threat because it threatened to try to use the resources of the region for its own population. And the United States and the West in general wants those resources to be used for its benefit, with a rake-off to the local tyrants. Well, that's a real conflict. That's why the U.S. has consistently opposed what's called radical nationalism, independent nationalism, not just in the Middle East, but everywhere else, in Latin America and Southeast Asia and so on. Well, you can argue that it's not a wise policy, maybe. But the question is it the policy, and does it serve the interests of the people who essentially run the country? Well, I think the answer is that it does. Actually, let's go back to the lobby. I mean, if the lobby, if, say, AIPAC, is as important as the caller and others believe, then there's a very simple tactical conclusion that follows. If AIPAC is that important, and if it's harming the interests that the government is trying to serve, then what we should do is very simple. We should put on ties and jackets, go to the corporate headquarters of Lockheed Martin, Intel, Warren Buffett, ExxonMobil, J.P. Morgan, and so on, and just patiently explain to them that their interests are being harmed by a lobby that they can wipe out in 5 minutes in terms of political power and economic clout.
Doctor, we only have a few minutes left.
Why does anybody do that?
We only have a few minutes left. I want to try to get some more callers on. Sarah, go ahead.
Hello, Dr. Tillawi. I'd like to ask Professor Chomsky.
Yes.
What does he think about the repercussions of the Lebanon war on the Palestinian issue? Does he think the Israelis may have lost a sense of security by the loss of sense of invincibility and security? Or would Israel try to efface its loss by becoming more intransigent in regards to compromising occupation?
Okay, thank you.
I'll listen in.
Thanks.
Same problem, I'm afraid. I couldn't hear the words.
Okay.
Can you repeat?
She was saying, what do you think the repercussions going to be now for the Palestinians that Israel was defeated in Lebanon? Do you think now we're going to see more of an aggressive Israel?
Yeah, I think so. And remember, at least in my view, it is not Israel. I agree with the Lebanese and others that it's the U.S.-Israel, the U.S.-Israeli alliance. Right now, the United States and Israel, I'll extend what I said, are carrying out a program. It's not just words. They're implementing a program to annex to Israel
Okay.
valuable land and the major resources in the water of the West Bank, to break the rest of it up into unviable enclaves, cantons, virtually separated from one another, and also from whatever little piece of Jerusalem will be left to the Palestinians. So the shrinking Palestinian lands will be broken up by infrastructure projects, other settlement, the separation wall, and so on.
Okay.
And the whole, what's left, will be imprisoned because Israel will be taking over the Jordan Valley.
Okay.
Those are the programs that you and I are paying for right now, and that Israel is implementing with the backing of the Bush administration. So, yeah, and I think those programs will intensify unless we do something about it. And we can do something about it. It's not out of our hands.
All right. Doctor, we're going to be going very quickly. Dale, go ahead, Dale, very quick, 30 seconds.
Yes. I just want to ask you, everybody's always talking about the oil. What does India have to do with the oil? Because I think they have the largest refineries, and all of the Arab countries have to send their oil to India. So what does India have to do with all of this?
Okay, thank you. What does India have to do with oil?
India? What does India have to do with oil? I'm sorry, I didn't hear it.
She said, what does India have to do with oil?
India?
Yeah. She said something about India has the largest refineries. I really not really sure.
India doesn't have the largest refineries. India is an oil importer.
Oh, okay. I'll tell you what. Let's go to AJ on line 1. Go ahead, AJ. AJ, you're on.
Yes, thank you. I have a question for Dr. Chomsky.
Yes, very quick, 30 seconds.
Okay, Dr. Chomsky, I read your book when I was in college in North Africa. It's called Generative Grammar, and that was my first introduction to your work. My question to you is this. I'm an Arab American, and I really do feel for the Palestinians. They're my blood, my family. But there's lack of democracy in the Arab world, and there's lack of human rights. I mean, how can we proceed about changing the lives of those people oppressed by their government and by the United States policy?
Very good. Very good. We're out of time. Doctor, go ahead. 30 seconds.
Could you repeat the question?
He said something about the lack of democracy in the Middle East. How can we improve the lives of the people there? We're like 30 seconds. How can we overcome this democracy thing?
Well, we can help democracy develop by putting an end to our prevention of democracy. The U.S. has been intervening for years to prevent democracy.
Okay.
They can achieve
Dr. Chomsky, I'm sorry, I apologize. I should not even have taken that call because we are completely out of time. I need probably 10 hours with you just to scratch the surface. Sir, I only have time to say thank you for coming on the program.
Very, very pleased to be with you.
Thank you. Back in 5 minutes.